Are you awkward like me? Let's be awkward together. Hey, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel where I help freelancers, consultants, and agency owners land clients. I am extremely introverted. Give this a like if you can relate. If I never had to speak to another human being again about work, I wouldn't. And it's not because I don't like people, it's because I often find communicating with them to be mentally and physically draining. But here's the thing, if you want to land clients, whatever type of business you're building, you're going to be doing sales, and that means that you're going to be talking to people in some capacity. There's no way to really avoid it, unfortunately. If this terrifies you, I totally get it. I've mentioned on this channel before that being introverted and being a little more on the reserved side, I used to get on sales calls with potential clients and I would be so petrified that I would actually sweat through my shirt. I would actually have to change my shirt afterward. So if the concept of doing sales scares you, I hear you. These days, I'm fine. Still introverted, but I know how to channel it and control it, and now I'm kind of a sales machine. What can I say? How can you get better at sales as an introvert? Let's jump right in with a few tips. Tip number 1, use it to your advantage. You think the fact that you're an introvert is a weakness because it makes it harder for you to talk to people. I will argue that it's a strength because by default, you're going to be a better listener. So let the lead do much of the talking. That's what they want to do anyway. People love talking about themselves and their problems. Besides, you need that in your sales calls because you need to gather all of this information about them to better understand what their problem is and if you can provide a solution. You don't have to have the gift of gab to be good at sales. You are a natural born listener. Leverage that and understand and accept and embrace that it's okay to be a little more quiet on sales calls. Tip number 2, outline some talking points in advance. Because we introverts can get really nervous on sales calls, the last thing you want to do is wing it. Now, I'm not telling you to have a full-blown script written up that you will follow word for word. You can, but in my experience, this makes people sound more robotic. So typically what I do with my students in Revenue Spark, I call it part script, part template, and then I tell them to personalize it and make it their own so that it feels natural to them. It's got to feel real to you. But the point is that you should have things written down in advance, like questions that you want to ask them. And you also want to prepare responses to very common questions that your leads are probably going to ask you. So things like the services that you offer and what they include, your starting rates, what else? How you typically work with clients, how you help them. Have those ready so that you don't have to think on your feet quite as much. Number 3 is kind of an extension of number 2, but you want to get the lead talking first. When you are preparing your questions in advance, your talking points, I want you to do it assuming that you're going to have them do most of the talking in the beginning. So you are going to start off the call by asking them questions, and you're going to listen as they answer, and if needed, take notes. There are 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that, like I mentioned a moment ago, you need to be collecting information about the lead to better understand them and what they're trying to accomplish. But the second reason you want to start the sales call by having them do all the talking is because it's going to give you a chance to get comfortable and settle down. If you think about it, when are you the most nervous on a phone call? It's right in the beginning, when it's a very new stimulus and you're feeling very unsure and very not confident. But if you let them take the lead for the first several minutes and you just respond and engage with them, it's going to help you feel a little more comfortable and a little more sure of yourself so that when it's your turn to take over the call, you're going to feel better about it. Tip number 4, practice responses to common sales objections. I'm not going to get into this too much because I do have a whole video on common objections and how to respond to them, so I'm just going to drop that link in the description below. But just know that if you've made it this far in a relationship with a lead, if you're on a sales call, at this point there are usually only a few objections you're going to get, probably with the most common being that they don't like your rates. Now, an introvert's natural reaction to a sales objection is probably panic. You start to stumble on your words, you don't know what to say. I can remember one time years ago, oh God, it was so embarrassing. I can't believe I said this. I was on the phone with a lead. I told them what my starting rates were. They told me that my prices were too high. And I actually said, okay. And then I was like, take care. And I hung up. Don't do that. Go watch the video below and I'll tell you exactly what to say to sales objections. Tip number 5, take your time. I was talking to one of my students one time, and I think he's also more on the introverted side. And we were talking about sales calls, and he expressed concern that he might sound awkward. And he said to me, what if they ask me a question that I don't have an immediate answer to? So, who cares? I want you to picture this, okay? You and I are talking, and you ask me, do you think we're going to colonize Mars anytime soon? I'm going to go, oh, that's a good question. I don't know, let me think for a second. Do you see what I just did? In natural conversations, we don't always have immediate responses, and that's okay because we're human. Sometimes we need to think about what we say first. If a lead asks you something and you don't know the answer right away, take one deep breath to slow yourself down. So on the call, go, that was me taking a breath, and then say to them, that's a really good question. Let me think on that for a second, and then collect your thoughts. I promise you, that temporary pause in the conversation that feels super long and super awkward to you, it is not nearly as bad as you think it is. I promise. And if you end up needing even more time to think of a response and the line has already been quiet for a couple seconds, just say that to them. It's okay to be transparent. Sometimes I'll say something like, I'm still thinking, just give me a second. I want to make sure I answer your question properly. They're fine. They don't think it's weird. Just collect yourself. No human being has a perfect response for everything. And if they do, they usually sound like they're full of poo. Spend a few extra seconds to give them a thoughtful response as opposed to some half-baked answer that you blurted out of panic. Tip number 6, do mock sales calls. I mentioned one of my students earlier on, and this is something I offer them, my students in Revenue Spark. We do pretend sales calls. And that's because for many of them, this is kind of their first time doing sales. And your first call should never be with the lead. It should be with a friend or a relative or your partner or roommate, whoever. Have them pretend to be a client. You can even write them up a script and then go through a pretend sales call. Is it the same thing as the real thing? Of course not, but it's going to give you a chance to practice saying these words and talking about business. Talk about rates, talk about money, have them object to you, have them give you common sales objections, which I talk about in that video, and then you practice refuting them. Do a pretend sales call at least once over both the phone and Zoom if video calls are something that you plan on offering. And on that note, tip number 7, if you're ultimately not comfortable with video calls, don't do them. I will always tell you to try. Just try it. Because there are a lot of things as a business owner that you're going to run into and you're going to be super uncomfortable, but it's just a matter of repetition of doing it. I'm the perfect example. I used to hate phone calls and I was terrified of them. These days, I still hate them, but I'm fine with them. But if you are adamant and you're like, I hate video calls, I'm petrified of them, I do not want to do them, don't. Just don't offer it in the first place. If you are setting up a sales call with a client, then ask them for their number and just confirm back. Say, okay, great, I'm gonna call you at this number at this day and time. Now, if they try to ask you for a Zoom call, for a video call, you have one of two options. Option 1 is to just say, if it's okay with you, can we do this over the phone? No big deal. Option number 2, just be honest with them. You can say something like, sure, no problem, but just a heads up, I'm really not comfortable being on camera, so mine will be off. And you tell them this so that once you get on the Zoom call, there aren't any surprises or assumptions or expectations, because it's going to be awkward if you don't say anything and then they turn their cameras on and you don't. Don't do that. Don't you don't want to catch them off guard. Some people purposely schedule Zoom calls because they want to see you. So you want to make sure you're clear about the expectations in advance. And honestly, when you say, I'm not turning my camera on, that might take the pressure off them too, because now they can also sit at home in their underwear and work. They don't have to get ready. Okay, so again, kind of reiterating what we talked about earlier when we were discussing not having an immediate answer. The stuff that we think about ourselves, the things that we think are going to sound super awkward and really weird, we're imagining that it's way worse than it really is. We are our own worst critics. More than likely, they're not thinking that. All right, let's keep going. Tip number 8, recap what you've talked about. This is a nice way to kind of start wrapping up the call, and it also makes things a little easier on you because you are just repeating what's already been said. Typically at the end of my sales calls, I will say something like, okay, so just to recap what we've talked about, you've explained how your current challenges are X, Y, and Z, and you're trying to accomplish A, B, C. As our next steps, how about we blah, blah, blah. So I'm recapping where they are, where they're trying to go, and I'm telling them what I think we should do next. For me, next steps are typically that I send them a proposal where I've outlined my services and my monthly rates. It shows them that you were listening, it shows them that you're on the same page, and it's also going to end, it's kind of a cool trick, I guess, for ending the conversation on a positive note, on a yes, because if you've gotten this far in the conversation and all has gone well, if you say, okay, our next step is for me to send you a proposal, more than likely they're going to be like, okay, cool, let's do it. You want to try to end the conversation on a yes. That means that the relationship is moving forward. If you are introverted, here's a little advice from your old pal Megan. Stop fighting it. For most of my life, I tried to force myself to be extroverted. I tried to force myself to be a social butterfly. And it wasn't until recently, like the last couple of years, when I finally understood and embraced I thrive better on my own. And this is not a negative. This is not a weakness. You are not at a disadvantage. Use your introversion, which I had to check, and it is a word. Use it to your advantage. Understand that when it comes to sales, or really anything in life, you are not starting at a deficit just because you're an introvert. Landing clients isn't easy. There are a lot of moving parts, and if you don't have them all lined up in the right order, it's probably just not going to work. So if you need a little more guidance and direction and help with landing clients, whether you're a freelancer or a consultant or an agency owner like me, then I'm going to drop the link in the description below to my program Revenue Spark, where you can learn more about the curriculum, read a few testimonials, and if you're interested in speaking more, you can book a call with me. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. If you made it this far, it's because you found this video helpful, so I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, just drop them in a comment, and I'll see you next time.